Julian Strawther may not have been drafted as high as Jalen Suggs or Corey Kispert or Rui Hachimura, but he is a candidate to break out in a major way for the Denver Nuggets this season.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by GameTime. Folks, download the GameTime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, we're going to close out the show with some Olympic talk today. We're going to discuss Team USA's win over the Australia Gales in a scrimmage game. We're going to talk about what's next for Team USA and Team Canada. We also got a couple of new metrics which are going to be used by the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee. We'll talk about those new metrics, what it might mean for Gonzaga and some of those bubble teams in the WCC. Could this help them get into the big dance? But first, we're leading off the show today talking Julian Strawther. I'll admit I wanted this entire segment to be about summer league games, but the Boston Celtics, which of course feature both Killian Tillie and Anton Watson, and the Sacramento Kings, which feature Drew Timme, all have games on Monday night, late. I am recording this before those games are happening, so we will have an update on how they are doing in summer league a little later in the week. But we got to talk about Julian Strawther, because through two summer league games, Julian has proved, A, that he is on the quote-unquote too good for summer league team. Every year there are players that play in summer league that it just feels like this guy doesn't need to be here. Sometimes they're guys coming off of a rookie season like Julian Strawther. Typically, they're not guys who were drafted in the late first round after just one season where they didn't play a huge role. Brandon Miller is a guy you'd expect to be on the too good for summer league team, and he is. Even Jaime Jaquez, who was kind of a late first-round pick, but had an immediate role for a very solid Miami team last year. Julian was on a great team in the Denver Nuggets, but he didn't have a day-to-day role with the Nuggets last year, in part because of the depth that Denver team had, in part because he dealt with some injuries in the middle of the season and it cost him some time. But typically when you're talking about those guys shouldn't be. Walker Kessler started the last two seasons for the Utah Jazz. What's he doing in summer league? He doesn't need to be there. That guy's fourth in the NBA in blocks over the last 2 years. Like, that's not a dude who needs to be in summer league. For the record, I don't care that two good players play in the summer league. I don't think it's a big deal. But when a player like Julian Strawther gets in that conversation, it's pretty notable, because a late first round pick who played sparingly as a rookie typically isn't in that conversation. And now we kind of look at, okay, does this potentially point to Julian taking on a significantly bigger role in his second season with the Denver Nuggets? Let's start with the stats. Julian has played 2 games right now with the Denver Nuggets in Summer League. His next game will be on Tuesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So as you're listening to this, if it is after 3 p.m. Eastern time, that game has already started. If not, you can definitely go try to check it out on NBA TV or somewhere on the internet. I'm sure you can find it. They're playing the Charlotte Hornets in that game. Or just follow the great Theo Lawson of the Spokesman Review. He is in the house in Las Vegas, been following the games, following the Zags, talking to them, tweeting about the games. Definitely a great resource for you there. He had a whole bunch of tweets on Sunday night about Julian Strawther's performance, because there was a whole heck of a lot to talk about. Let's start with Julian's first game with Denver. He had 25 points in this game. This was against the Los Angeles Clippers. 25 points in this one, 5 rebounds. He had an assist and a steal. He was 4 of 9 on 2-pointers. He was only 3 of 10 from the three-point line. So he took 19 total shots in this game. He is the player that Denver is getting the ball in his hands and letting him go to work. It is very clear, and they've talked about it. The coaching staff for the Summer League team, Michael Malone, the head coach for the actual Denver Nuggets roster, they have talked about there's a handful of key things they're trying to get out of Summer League, and one of them is pretty specifically to showcase Julian as a volume shooter, as somebody who is more on ball, because that's not the role that he had last year. It's not a role that he's really had a lot in his career. He wasn't a ball-dominant player at Gonzaga. But what Denver's trying to do is trying to figure out, can he be somebody that thrives in situations where he has the ball more in his hands? And this makes sense. They're trying to figure out what they want his role to look like next year. It certainly seems like it's going to be expanded from where it was in year one, and figuring out, using summer league as a way to kind of see how those skills kind of translate is a smart thing. It's a thing that NBA staffs, coaching staffs that win championships do. And the Denver Nuggets are a team that wins championships. And this is what they're doing, is trying to figure out what is the best way to utilize this player for our roster next year. And let's use summer league and see what he can do in that environment to kind of figure out what roles might suit him best for us in his second NBA season. So again, in that first game, 19 shots for Julian, 4 of 9 on twos, 3 of 10 from the 3-point line, 8 of 10 from the free throw line, 25 points. That's a pretty darn good game. And he did better in nearly every single way in his second summer league game. 32 points in that one. He had 5 assists and 3 rebounds. He tacked on a steal and a block. He was also 4 of 9 on 2-point shots. Very consistent there. But instead of going 3 of 10 from 3 like he did the previous game, he went 6 of 12. And then he was 6 of 10 from the free throw line, an area that he kind of struggled in this game. Somewhat surprisingly, not typically something you see from Julian. He's been a good free throw shooter. Wouldn't worry about a 6 of 10. 32 points, 5 assists, 6 made 3-pointers. Dude was absolutely cooking. And yes, for those of you who watched the game or were tracking along, he did miss what would have been a game-tying shot at the buzzer. It ended up costing Denver the game. I mean, they lost the game because of that. It wasn't the sole reason they lost by any stretch, but Julian did miss what would have been an opportunity to send that game into overtime and get him to 35 points, where who knows, in overtime, if he'd scored 5 more, we could have been talking about a 40-burger from Julian Strawther, something that we haven't seen from him since he was at Gonzaga when he did it against Portland in Portland, the last player to score 40 points for the Gonzaga Bulldogs in a game. Fantastic stuff from Julian Strawther. Worth pointing out, he did this with a not fully healthy ankle. Scored 25 points in his first game, 32 points in his second game, and he was getting taped up. He was getting iced up after the game. He kind of winced and grabbed his ankle early in that second game, waved off the coaching staff, who had just, by the way, lost Deron Holmes, their first-round pick in this most recent draft class, went down in his first summer league game, tore his Achilles. He's done for the year. So you could be understanding if the Denver Nuggets were watching their rookie from the previous year holding his ankle in summer league in his second game after he'd already dropped 25 in the first game, and them saying, maybe we should pull him. Maybe we should sit him down and not worry about the results of this game, which don't matter at all, or even really his performance. They obviously have things they want to see from him. We talked about that already. But I wouldn't have been at all surprised to see them say, yeah, we're just going to play this safe. We're going to sit you down. We're going to take a look at Hunter Tyson and some of these other guys we have on the roster here and kind of see how they fit, where they might be able to kind of slot into a roster. And we'll worry about figuring out Strawther's fit a little bit later. But they didn't. They let him go. They let him keep going, and he cooked for the entire rest of the game. Really, really fun to see that. Exciting for Julian, exciting for the Denver Nuggets, exciting for Gonzaga fans who got to see him do this. And like I said, he is a candidate for the too good for the summer league team, but more importantly, he's a candidate to take on a bigger role for the Denver Nuggets next year. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is gone. He was their starting 2-guard last year. He signed a contract with the Orlando Magic. He is out the door. Everybody expects the new starter for the Denver Nuggets to be Christian Braun. Braun was at Kansas. He helped them immediately as a rookie a couple of years ago. He plays the same position. He's been in the system a year longer than Julian. I think it makes sense for it to be Christian Braun. And I'd be very surprised if Strawther started for Denver over Braun. I think there are maybe some other candidates on the roster who could start Denver. There's still free agents out there. I think Gary Trent Jr. is still available. There's a few others that are starting caliber players that Denver could, in theory, go after. I'm not enough of an expert on the cap space situation for them to know if that's a realistic option for them. But generally, the expectation is that Christian Braun will step into that starting role. That means that his minutes that he had as a role player, as a bench player for Denver last year, are open. And Julian is the very obvious candidate to take those minutes. He's proven it with what he did last year for Denver. He's proving it now in the summer league. Denver's developmental system is fantastic. And look, Julian he shot not very great last year for Denver. He shot like just under 30% from 3. That's his moneymaker. That's his calling card. He knows that. We know that. Denver knows that. But I'd be stunned if he shoots 30% again next year. He had some really great quotes talking about his summer league experience, talking about what the team is trying to get out of him, and talking about just kind of adjusting to the processing speed of NBA basketball last year, and how it took him some time to realize how quick everything moves and how fast everything's happening, and just kind of getting up to speed without trying to go too fast, and ultimately, then making mistakes. That's a common thing for rookies. He feels like he got better at that as the year went on. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Julian Strawther shoot 37, 38, 40% from three next year in a consistent 12, 15, 18, 20 minute per game roll off the bench, maybe sprinkle it in some starts depending on injuries, things like that. Point is, that's a big jump from where he was last year. That is a big leap to go from barely playing, mostly garbage time for a NBA championship caliber program in Denver to being on that same team, still with NBA championship aspirations, and now suddenly having a consistent night in and night out role. But that looks very likely based on what we've seen from Julian. And again, Summer League, you take with a grain of salt. But the way they are featuring him, the way they are utilizing him, the way they are studying him, the way that he's performing, and the roster construction with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope out the door, all pretty clearly point to Strawther taking on a much bigger role next year. And the way Denver's developed players in the past, there's not any reason to believe that he can't make a pretty big leap and be a very, very improved player as a second year in the NBA than he was as a rookie. We're going to switch gears here in the second segment, talk about Bart Torviks' T-rank data and a new results-based metric, which are both going to be used by the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee in March. What does that mean for Gonzaga? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, minor league baseball season is here. And as somebody who lives like 10 minutes away from a minor league baseball stadium, I love being able to make last-minute decisions, to grab my sunglasses, prepare to go out to the ballpark and catch a game. And that's why I use GameTime. Because, folks, prices on the GameTime app, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And if you're somebody who's worried about buying tickets and they're not going to be real, you're going to get turned away at the gate. It's going to be a frustrating experience for you or your family. One of the great things about GameTime is their customer service policy is the most flexible one in the entire ticketing industry. And personally, I love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. You want 2 tickets to a minor league baseball game in your area? They're probably about $25 total. You can get them for $5 if you download GameTime and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege today. Terms do apply. So download the GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. And folks, if you want to hear more about Denver's strategy with Julian Strawther, what they're going to do with one of our favorite Zags of the last couple of years, check out Locked On Nuggets. They're talking all about it. They talked about Julian Strawther just recently. Adam Mayer's fantastic job on that show. Go check it out if you have not done so yet. We're moving on, though. We're talking NCAA Tournament Selection Committee, because the overall NCAA committee met a week ago, 2 weeks ago, something like that, and discussed a handful of various topics regarding the NCAA tournament and just kind of what the plans are with that going forward. The big headline from that event was effectively a non-headline, which was they did not expand the NCAA tournament. There's been talk for months, years, decades, really, if we're going to be honest about it, about expanding the NCAA tournament. It has been a 64-team field starting in 1985. Recently, they expanded to 68. They added the play-in games. There's been talk recently about continuing to expand on those play-in games, having more play-in games, 72, potentially 76 teams. This is something that the Power Conference commissioners want. Greg Sankey for the SEC wants it. This is a big storyline in the NCAA because the NCAA needs to placate that leadership. If they keep saying no to the SEC is just going to say, we don't need you, which has been pretty proven, unfortunately, and we're going to go do our own thing. The NCAA is desperately trying to avoid that while also trying to avoid getting rid of the things about the NCAA tournament that people love, like mid-major darlings and Cinderella stories and various things like that. So this expansion talk is really tense on both sides because it feels like a lot hangs in the balance. So when the committee met and they released their kind of what came out of the meetings, and NCAA tournament expansion was not on there, that was kind of became the big headline. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And in fact, it's almost certainly going to happen to some degree in some capacity in the not too distant future. But that's kind of what people really got out of these meetings is, oh, okay, nothing happened. Well, that's not entirely true. That major thing did not happen. But other things did happen. Among them, specifically for college basketball nerds like me, and frankly, if you're listening to a Gonzaga podcast in mid-July, you might be a little bit of a college basketball nerd. Nothing wrong with that, but this might be of interest to you. The selection committee, every time that they meet when they meet on Selection Sunday to determine who's going to make the NCAA tournament, they're given sheets. Team sheets, and these sheets have a handful of different metrics that they are supposed to be utilizing primarily to determine which teams are going to make the field, who's going to be on the bubble, off the bubble, and then of course the actual seeding for the big dance. Previously, the committee had 2 predictive ratings on these metric sheets and then 2 results-based metrics on these sheets. Those were BPI and KenPom. Those were the 2 predictive metrics. Strength of record and KPI were the results-based metrics. And then, of course, the net ranking, which we referenced a bunch last year on Locked On Zags. It is the kind of overall primary source, that the one data point that is kind of the, for lack of a better word, most important for the committee in terms of determining all of those various things that they're looking at on Selection Sunday. So they had those 5 metrics, and now they're adding 2 more, 1 predictive, 1 results-based. The predictive metric being added is called T-rank. And it is on Bart Torviks' website. I referenced Torvik at this time last week because he did a refresh on his 2025 rankings and predictions on how teams will do. Gonzaga was 9th. We talked about that. We talked about where the rest of the WCC was. Torvik's data has been around for a long time. He utilizes, it's similar to KenPom in a lot of ways of being analytic models, talking about every team, making predictions, talking about individual player stats, etc. And T-rank, and this is according to his website, he had a great blog explaining it, is very similar to KenPom. It's not very different. It utilizes offensive and defensive efficiency using points per possession or possessions per 100 data. That's basically what KenPom does. And I'm not going to get super far into the weeds, but basically, this is a similar data point to KenPom's offensive and defensive efficiency, with a few exceptions. It incorporates a game script stat, which kind of shows the ebbs and flows of the game. So like if Gonzaga won a game by 12, but at one point they were up by 35, T-rank is going to incorporate that more into their data than KenPom does. So it could be considered good or bad in that specific example. And KenPom's data removes garbage time. It has a specific script that it says, hey, at this point, we're no longer counting offensive and defensive efficiency numbers because the game is in garbage time. T-rank doesn't do that. Again, you could maybe make an argument that hurts Gonzaga, but also it might help Gonzaga. We saw last year a handful of times they brought in the Joe Few lineup and things got worse for them. So in theory, having game time or garbage time included might actually be a negative for Gonzaga. Regardless, it is another analytical model, another statistics-based data point for the committee to use. There's nothing wrong with the eye test. There's nothing wrong with wins and losses, who'd they beat, who'd they lose to. That data matters. It does. It always will. But there is nothing wrong with incorporating more analytics as well to either confirm what you're seeing with the eye test, or if they don't match up, do some extra digging. And having KenPom, having BPI, now having T-rank right in front of these committee members when they're making these decisions, it's nothing but a good thing. Wins above bubble is the other stat that has been added. This is the results-based metric as opposed to the predictive metric that T-rank would be. Wins above bubble is very simple. I'm going to read the specific definition as described in the NCAA's statement released about these new data points. It says, quote, the difference in the number of wins a team has compared to the expected number of wins an average bubble team would earn against a given team's schedule. So think of it like WAR for baseball. If you guys are baseball fans, WAR has been around for a very long time. WAR stands for wins over replacement. If you have a WAR of 8.4, that means your production is 8.4 wins better than a replacement player. A replacement level player would have a 0.0 WAR. They are not adding any wins to your team. A player with a negative 2.3 WAR is 2 wins worse than a replacement level player. That's basically exactly what wins above bubble is. A bubble team would win 0 games in this schedule, or would go 500. That's a better way to put it. They would win 16 games, lose 16 games against this schedule. Gonzaga goes 18-14. They're 2 wins above bubble. That's a good example. And a better example would be Gonzaga going 25-6 or whatever and being 15 wins above the bubble. Whatever, you guys get the point. It is a results-based metric. This is basically wins and losses. If you win a lot of games, your wins above bubble is going to be better. If you lose a lot of games, it's going to be worse. It is not an incredibly complicated stat, but it is valuable because one of the things that the committee is determining is the bubble. If you're looking at 2 or 3 different teams, you're trying to figure out, should it be St. John? Should it be Pitt? Should it be Virginia? Like they were determining last year. I don't know their data in front of me, but if St. John's was 4 wins above the bubble and Virginia was even, you probably go with St. John's instead of Virginia. Should have done that last year anyway, as we saw from Virginia's horrendously pitiful performance in their play-in game. But regardless, that's the kind of data. Again, it's not complicated. It's not, it's easy to understand. It's easy to digest for the committee members, but it is valuable data for them to have. And now it's going to be presented in front of them. More statistics, more various ways to look at a team's resume is nothing but a good thing. There's no perfect way to build a field of 68. It doesn't exist. How could it possibly exist? There will never be a bracket that everybody says universally, wow, they got all that right. Every team that made it should have been in. Every team that didn't make it didn't deserve to be in. That's never going to happen. And getting it perfect or getting it exactly right isn't really the goal. But you want to put the teams that deserve to be in, and you want to leave the teams out that don't deserve to be in. And using extra data points is the best way to get to that spot. Does this mean anything for Gonzaga? Not really. Not really. We mentioned how T-Rink may be slightly different from KenPom, and that could impact Gonzaga as a team that plays more garbage time minutes than many other teams in college basketball do. That will have an impact, but Gonzaga hasn't been on the bubble in a long time. They were rumored to be on the bubble last year. They put that away with a strong second half. The bubble's not a big concern for Gonzaga. Some of this data could impact their seeding, but it would be minimal differences. Maybe it impacts WCC teams. Maybe Santa Clara gets a slightly better look because of some of these data points. Maybe their wins above bubble is good enough that people start to think, oh, maybe that is a team that deserves to get in. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. It depends how they do this upcoming season. But it is a good thing that the committee has more data to utilize when making their decisions regarding who's going to make the field and who's not. There was very little else in this NCAA committee meeting that matters. It's worth pointing out there's 31 automatic bids and 37 at-large bids now. It used to be 32 and 36. The only reason that changed is because the Pac-12 died. That's it. Very obvious change that they're making. There's only 31 conferences, so now there's 31 automatic bids. That means there's one more at-large bid. Hooray. Doesn't really make a difference, but just a fact that we now know. All right. We're moving on to the Olympics. We got Summer League. We got NCAA tournament changes. Now, closing out the show, talking about the Olympics. Team USA played Australia in a friendly scrimmage. And once again, Mark Few took down the Gales, took down Matthew Dellavedova, took down Patty Mills, took down Jock Landale. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are closing out the show talking about Team USA and the Olympics. Yes, it is going to be a regular part of the show for the next month or so as Team USA and Team Canada and the women's team for Team Canada as they all get prepared for the upcoming Olympic Games. They've got scrimmages. We're going to continue to keep you up to date on the scrimmages. And then, of course, as the actual Olympics get underway in Paris, we're going to talk about that, how Team USA is doing as they're coached by Mark Few, how Team Canada, which has Kelly Olynyk and Andrew Nembhard on the roster, and Connor Griffin working with the team. We're going to talk about how they're doing. Yvonne Ejim playing for Team Canada on the women's side. We're going to talk about them. We'll also talk about Team Japan with Rui Hachimura and Team Serbia with Filip Petrusev. Plenty of Zags in the Olympics, so we got plenty of coverage coming your way. On Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Team USA scrimmaged Team Australia. The game took place in Abu Dhabi. It was a 9 a.m. start. Like I said, it was on FS1. A lot of these scrimmages are televised on FS1. So if you have that, you get an opportunity to watch these games. Team USA won 98-92. Wouldn't be overly concerned about the margin of victory. Yes, Team USA is probably more than 6 points better than Team Australia. But they're still experimenting with lineups. They basically played all of their guys in this 18 to 25 minute range. When they get into the actual Olympics, that's probably not what they're going to do. They're going to play the players that are the best matchup wise, that are playing the best. They're going to play them more minutes. They're not going to spread the love as evenly as they have been up to this point. Team USA shot about 54% from the field. They shot about 42% from three. Anthony Davis, once again, was the best player for the United States. 17 points, 14 boards. Devin Booker had 16. And Anthony Edwards had 14. I swear not every player on Team USA is from the SEC, but in that example, you got two boys from Kentucky and Davis and Booker, and then Anthony Edwards from Georgia. But while not every player on Team USA is from the SEC, it sure feels like so many of the players for Australia are from St. Mary's. In fact, it's only 3, but still 3 former Gales representing Australia for the Olympics in this scrimmage game against Team USA. And the winner out of the 3 of them was far, far and away Jock Landale. He was awesome in this game. He looked really, really good. He had 20 points. He had 7 rebounds. All 7 of his rebounds were on the offensive glass. That might be a problem Team USA needs to work on a little bit. No disrespect to Jock Landale, but if he's getting 7 offensive boards against Team USA, that's not a good sign when they play, Victor Wembanyama or Nikola Jokic or some of the other players that they're going to face in these Olympics. Landale also had 6 assists and 2 steals. He was 9 of 12 from the field. This was an exceptional game for Jock Landale. He looked like their best player by far. The other 2 former Gales, not so great. Patty Mills started. He played 22 minutes, but he wasn't very good. 5 points, 3 boards, 2 assists. He had 5 turnovers, 2 of 8 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. He's getting a little up there in age. I like Patty Mills. I like watching him play. He's had a prolific NBA career, but if he's your starting point guard for that team, I'm a little concerned about what that's going to do for them going forward. And then Matthew Dellavedova barely saw the floor. Just 4 minutes for him in this one. He had 2 boards and 2 assists as well as a steal. I was very surprised when Team Australia's roster came out that Matisse Thybulle, who plays for the Portland Trailblazers, former University of Washington star, he did not make the roster for Team Australia, and yet Matthew Dellavedova did. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm a little biased. I'm not a big Washington fan, but I'm also not a Gales fan, but I'm a Blazers fan. And Matisse is pretty close to being in his prime and played really well last year for Portland. I was like, why is this dude not making the Australian roster, and why is Mills and Delly making it? Well, Delly only played 4 minutes, so it doesn't feel like he's a big-time projected contributor for them. So I'm a little surprised. It feels like Thybulle is a really good wing defender. It feels like he's offering a little bit more. Maybe there's other factors at play. I certainly don't know all the situations there. There were plenty of other players on Australia that are recognizable names. Josh Giddey, former Oklahoma City Thunder, former teammate of Chet Holmgren's, now with the Chicago Bulls. Joe Ingles, Dante Exum, Dyson Daniels, a handful of others as well that I think are names people will recognize. But nice to see Mark Few get a win over St. Mary's, over at least a trio of St. Mary's players, all who gave him some serious fits during their time with the Gales. This Australia team's decent. They're probably not going to medal. I don't want to say for sure not, but it would be surprising if they were to put themselves in the medaling conversation. In terms of what's next for Team USA, they got a scrimmage on Wednesday, July 17th at 9 a.m. on FS1. This one's worth tuning into because they're scrimmaging Serbia. So you will not only get to see Mark Few on the sidelines, but you will see at least one former Zag playing in this game in Filip Petrusev. He is the backup to some guy named Nikola Jokic for the Denver Nuggets in the NBA, of course, playing for Team Serbia here. I'm excited to see this, not just to see Petrusev get a chance to play, but also just to see how Team USA handles Jokic. They also have Bogdan Bogdanovic and a handful of other NBA players or pseudo-NBA players. This is a good Serbian team, a team that a lot of people expect to medal, so it'll be good to see how Team USA handles this scrimmage. They also got South Sudan on July 20th at noon and Germany on July 22nd at noon. Also, both those games will be on FS1. In terms of what's next for Canada, folks, it's really hard to find data. Canada's got a website, they got social media accounts, but there's not a lot of data about their upcoming schedule. Finding box scores has been a challenge. I know the women's team has played 2 scrimmages and have gotten beaten pretty badly in both of them. They played Belgium and got beat by 30. They lost their other scrimmage game by about 15, but I cannot find a box score anywhere. So I am not sure how much Yvonne Ejim is playing. I also, as we've said with Team USA, playing time right now is not necessarily indicative of how much they'll actually play in Paris. But I wish I could give you more information. If anybody can find box scores on the senior women's national team for Canada, please send them my way. I would love to be able to for sure give you a shout out on the show. I'd love to be able to get those box scores out there. For the men's side, they're scrimmaging France on July 19th. Kelly Olynyk versus Victor Wembanyama. We'll see how that matchup goes. Kelly struggled defensively in the scrimmage against USA. They don't have a lot of size on that Canada roster, and Victor is as tough of an assignment as you're going to get in this Olympic Games. So we'll see what that looks like for the men's side. Hopefully we'll get an update on the women's side and what's going on with that squad as well. Folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On Zags. Thanks so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. A special shout out to those everyday listeners, especially here in mid-July. I really appreciate getting a chance to come up with content and talk about various things going on in Gonzaga land, like Julian Strawther, like the Olympics, like Summer League and other things. So I appreciate all of you who are tuning into the show. Reminder to join the Discord channel if you have not done so yet. It is free to join. There's a link in the show notes on audio and video platforms. Free, hanging out, talking Gonzaga basketball all the dang time. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back later this week with more conversations around the Olympics, more conversations on recruiting, various other things going on in Zag land. Until then, though, as always, go Zags.